to the VMware Cloud on AWS Customer Success Office Hours on the 7th of April. And we are anywhere from 2 weeks to many more weeks into our lock-ins. I hope we're all faring well and nobody's in any catastrophe or dire straits. It's interesting times that we live in. Online with me today we have a couple of my architecture colleagues, Christoph Lombard and Rick Hoffman, and we have a number of other people watching live on Twitch, and we've got some colleagues from our cloud support engineering and GSS teams online as well. As usual, if you have any questions or would like to have us discuss a topic or run through anything with you, please feel free to reach out. You can either ask us live, I will unmute you, and you can ask us live if you're feeling brave, or if you just want to post in any of the chat boxes, you can. You've got Q&A and chat on Zoom, and you've got Twitch chat as well, so there are many different ways to reach us. We've had Fabio and Zach join us, and Ruth as well, so welcome folks. Today what I thought I'd do, it's been a few weeks since we were last online, and apologies for having made you subscribe again to the webinar series. We had a bit of a Zoom challenge, and as you can imagine right now, Zoom is being absolutely hammered by well, everybody really. People in school, family and friends, everybody's on Zoom, so hopefully we won't have any issues with it, but do let me know if you've got audio problems as well. So we had a few questions come through and a few topic suggestions throughout the week, so I thought I'd dive into those in a minute as well. And then if anybody wants me again to run through anything specifically, we can do, but hopefully the topics that we're going to have will spark some conversation and allow us to dive into them in a bit more detail. So let's dive in. So there's a couple of things being suggested internally that have come up from calls, and there's something that I wanted to call out specifically based on some work myself, one of our CSMs who's online, Ruth, and Darren, in fact, who's on as well, has been dealing with, and that's the difference between supportability and fitting into an SLA requirement. Now there seems to be a little bit of ambiguity, and a few people have maybe taken the wrong end of this, myself included in some conversations, to be fair. So I thought what I would do is I would just dig into it with one specific use case, right? And that's around our ability to for you to claim SLA credit, shall we say, if we don't meet our published SLA, so our service level agreement. Now, one of these areas has always been around storage, and we've always maintained that when you first deploy, if you deploy, you know, up to kind of between 3 and 5 hosts, you can run with a failures to tolerate set at 1, okay, meaning that there's one additional copy of the blocks on vSAN, or one additional copy of your virtual machine, effectively. Now, we've always said that once you get beyond 6 hosts, that you need to have an FTT set of 2, FTT set to 2, that is, to maintain SLA. And as I mentioned before, even I've got this the wrong way around before, and actually talked about it as though it's a supported statement. And in actual fact, it isn't a supported statement. We will obviously support you if you're running more than 6 hosts and you have an SLA of, you have an FTT setting of 1. Now, this came up recently because of some work we were doing with a customer where they had some data inconsistencies, and we had to investigate. Now, the customer, like many of you, have been recommended to use FTT equals 1 for certain workload types, for example, database servers, where they may perform slightly worse if you have additional failures to tolerate set on them. Now, what that does mean, though, is if you have more than 6 hosts, you may then fall outside of the SLA requirement for you to be able to claim credits back if we don't meet our SLA for storage. Now, does that make sense to everybody so far online?
It does to me, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool.
Well,
hello. Yeah, thanks for that. So I guess the reason I'm calling it out is that we're architects, right? And hopefully everyone joining in is interested in kind of the architect's view. Now, there are always going to be balances and trade-offs between things like cost, performance, all these things that we take into account when we're designing and helping to architect solutions and platforms for ourselves and for our customers. And I think this is one of those areas that needs to be taken into account, right? So if you are, like most companies in the world, running database services and you're running them on VMC, then you need to look at the performance requirements of that database and then maybe even perform tests to see if the FTT setting of 2 is actually valid for you and does allow your database to run, or if you have a highly performant database, then you may need to drop it to FTT equals 1. However, you just need to be aware of the outcome of doing that. So you would then remove yourself from that, from forcing us to be putting that SLA compliant policy against that bit of storage. I've said that in a bit of a roundabout manner, I know, but does that make sense? So you're kind of looking at performance over cost over SLA compatibility. Yeah, good. I will always, as is the case, I will take silence as complete and utter agreement that whatever I've said is the word of God, and nothing else needs to be discussed. So if you do, please feel free. If you do disagree with me or you're not sure, shout out and then we can talk about it some more. Or hopefully you'll disagree with me and we can have a more interesting conversation rather than you just listening to me waffle on. But if if it's valid, then that's also fine.
I just have a question for you, Will. It's Christoph.
Hey.
How the customer is able to calculate this availability or unavailability if it happens? Because I don't think it's so easy to be aware of that, or at least maybe digging into the logs.
So, sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question, Christoph.
Yeah, it's just that it seems that we are, contractually having some SLAs with our customer, but how the customer can calculate this, credits in terms of there is an unavailability at one moment and is aware of it, but is there an easy way to calculate the time during which it was not available?
Yeah, good shout. Okay, so I will, unless one of my colleagues wants to try and drag it up for me whilst I'm talking and send me the link. There is an SLA document that we produced. It's search for VMC SLA, and I've no doubt it will come up. In fact, let's see if we can do that live now. And in this service level agreement, oh hello, look at that. Is that the one straight away? So what it does detail here is the agreement in everything. It says what we will make reasonable efforts to deliver for you, and then how you actually claim back something where we've missed our SLA. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that totally makes sense. It's just that I was wondering, there is a customer unhappy, and how is it calculating the total of minutes in the months that the service was unavailable? I mean, is it something that we have to tell them, or is it something that he should calculate himself?
No, so they make a claim. I was just looking for the line in this document where it actually details that they actually put a claim in, and then we would, I've no doubt, actually, if Donald or Darren, if you want to shout up and unmute yourselves, feel free. They put a claim in, and then I guess we'll trawl the logs to see where and for how long we missed the SLA, and then we apply credits to their account based on how long the miss went on for.
Okay.
Yeah, for the service-wide outages, we clearly specify the start and end time of the outages in the status page. I can also ping the link of the status page. And for customer-specific outages, customers can file in the request whenever they have outages, and we can decide on the outage time based on the logs.
Yeah, exactly, Prasanna. So thanks for that. So they, if there's a fleet-wide, platform-wide sort of outage, we will notify via our status page, and I'll just bring that up as well. So for those folks that haven't, it's VMware Cloud status, I think we find it. Up here you can subscribe to you know, whatever outages that you are relevant to you. I would recommend that you don't subscribe to everything that's not necessarily relevant to your region you're deployed in, and we will publicize any outages or any maintenance and stuff that's happening on there. If it's just specific to you, to your SDDC, something's gone wrong, then again, yeah, like Prasanna says, we will trawl the logs and pull that information from there once you've submitted your claim. And I think that I'm sure the claim link was in here.
Yeah, there's a text.
Alright, there you go. Yeah, to request SLA credit, you must file a support request within 60 days of or after the suspected event. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. No worries. So anything else on SLA there at all? It's not a huge amount to discuss on it. You know, we have published SLAs, and if we miss it, we'll give you credits. Nope. Good. Okay. So one other thing that I wanted to bring up that was actually requested to talk about was the change in the EDRS policy as driven somewhat by the current situation. Okay, so you know, there's no point me listing what the current situation is. I can just say COVID. You're all aware, it's horrible. But what it has done is it has driven a drastic change in working behavior for pretty much everybody on the planet, I would say. And people that are typically office bound are finding their remote working, and they're remote working, so they're finding they're having to use new ways of accessing data and applications, and the IT teams are finding that they are having to provision remote working tools, you know, remote desktops, applications delivered remotely, that sort of thing. Now, obviously, VMware has a suite of products that cover the end user computing space, Horizon 7 and Workspace ONE being those, or some of them. Now, we can obviously run remote desktops on VMware Cloud on AWS, and there are a number of ways of sort of provisioning that. But what the way sort of remote desktops work differs drastically from servers. You know, the provisioning requests and provisioning times are different. You get login storms when everybody logs on at 9 o'clock, as opposed to servers that are serving data pretty statically most of the time, I'd imagine. So we have we've implemented a new DRS policy, which will actually have some benefits to non sort of remote desktop working situations as well. So for those of you that are aware and those that maybe aren't, let's just have a quick look. So when we go into our SDDC, we have this button down here, Edit Edrs Settings. Edrs allows us to automatically scale out and in some cases scale in environments, and we can do this based on performance or cost, or the default one, which is storage, is something that the end customer cannot control, something that we manage for you. But there's a new option called optimize for rapid scale out. Now, what the original EDRS settings sort of did was it scaled out based on adding one node at a time. So if you breached one of the EDRS settings, so there's an algorithm for Elastic DRS that runs in the background. The algorithm runs every 5 minutes, and it looks at the settings that you've chosen. So, for example, if it is based on lowest cost, for example, it looks at utilization of the cluster, and if you breach any of the threshold settings on memory, CPU, or storage, it will scale out and add a host. Now that's all well and good, but obviously adding a host at a time is not necessarily going to be good in a remote desktop world where you might be spawning hundreds or thousands of desktops at that login storm time. So we've increased the rapid scale out for to increase the number of hosts that are added at a single time, so they're no longer adding just one host, they're adding multiple hosts. And I don't know if any of you guys online are aware of any of the other major changes to EDRS, whether the time check is the time delay between recommendations, for example, is decreased from 30 minutes, or the 3-hour delay to scale out events happens. Any of you are aware of the differences? Nope.
I haven't heard anything. Nope.
Okay, so excuse me. So yeah, as far as I'm aware, the major change is that it will deploy multiple hosts now rather than single. So that's great for virtual desktops, but that might also be great for smaller migration events as well. So for example, one of our recommendations has always been don't use DRS or don't rely on EDRS for migration activities. So if you're migrating from on-prem to the cloud, for example, don't rely on EDRS to add a host to keep your environment growing as you migrate to it. We've always stated that it would be a better idea to pre-populate the SDVC or pre-deploy those hosts so that things like vSAN is already aware of all the nodes. It doesn't have to do a rebalance operation in the middle of also doing an onboard of VMs in a migration event, that sort of thing. But depending on how small scale and how slow your migration is going, this may now, and I'm saying may, I'm not saying I recommend it, but it may now be a viable operation to rely on EDRS for scaling out your environment. Now that's a bit of a contentious maybe, so does anybody have anything to say about that? Anything that would contradict my my non-recommendation there? Don't tell me I've got it right again. Okay, so I guess one of the negatives there is that even if it adds one host or it adds 50 hosts, it's still going to have to do a rebalance operation from a vSAN storage perspective. So it's still going to have increased load, and if you continue migrating onto that cluster, then you're kind of double hitting the cluster, shall we say. So you're going to see some negative performance increase, negative performance maybe affecting the virtual machines that are already running on that cluster. And again, I haven't tested it, but you may see a bit of an inception loop where you scale out due to storage to stay ahead of your migration, and then the load on the cluster becomes so great whilst it's rebalancing the stuff that it actually creates another auto scale out event based on CPU or memory, for example. So interesting. I've not tried it. I don't think I'd ever want to try it, but it's again something you might want to be aware of. Does that all make sense?
So does this give the customer the ability now to, if you like, what if you just want to manually expand your cluster? Can you add multiple hosts simultaneously?
It's a good shout. So
without having to rely on EDRS.
Yeah, so you can now I think via the API is where you can add multiple hosts in one go, correct? So if you deploy, there's a maximum that you can initially deploy when you first spin up the SDDC, but then via the API you can add X number more hosts, which is where we recommend doing sort of straight away. That's correct, isn't it? So I don't think it changes that, Zach, in any sort of fundamental way. I think that to add multiple hosts in any way, shape, or form, you'd probably do it via the API and call out the number of hosts you're adding, and then obviously changing any relevant vSAN policies if required. Does that cover the question or not really?
Yeah, I just didn't know if you could do that or not.
Yeah, to be fair, this is pretty new, and I haven't seen it in action yet myself. So it'd be interesting to see it kick in. What is interesting is the difference between the best performance and lower cost from a EDRS perspective are mainly on the low threshold. So if you notice, for best performance and lowest cost and rapid scale out, they're still all set at 90, 80, 70, but the scale in, the low threshold is where the difference is. So 50/50 for CPU memory for best performance, and then different for lower cost, so 60/60, and then for the rapid scale out there is no automated scale back in, so you have to manually scale back in if you want to, rather than relying on this. And the important point here is that scale out is if a single threshold is met. Scale in, you have to meet all three of these thresholds before it will auto scale back in. I think we've discussed that before, primarily around why 20% storage utilization is so low for automated scale back in. But as I say, there's no automated scale back in for the rapid scale out EDRS setting. Okay. I'm just trying to remember what else. So we just briefly touched on remote desktops and different ways of working and stuff. So what we're starting to see actually is a number of current VMC customers, or in fact new VMC customers as well, starting to either come in with a remote desktop, remote working sort of use case straight off the bat, or they're already running on VMC and they are starting to think about running remote desktops on there to support their remote workforces as things like lock-ins are getting longer and longer. So I thought it'd be worth briefly discussing some of the differences between running Horizon 7 on VMC on AWS over running it on-prem, for those of you that are familiar with Horizon 7 as it stands. What we won't do on this course is go into specifics around Horizon 7, primarily because none of us are Horizon 7 experts. We've kind of gone through a bit of a rapid enablement sort of window ourselves because of the increased demand, and there are plenty of really good sort of videos on YouTube from the Tech Zone, which is the end user computing BU's tech marketing area for Horizon 7. So I would recommend going to YouTube and looking up Tech Zone or looking up the Horizon EUC BU videos if you want to learn more about Horizon 7 itself. But for those of you that are familiar, what I thought I'd do is just run through some of the core differences. For those of you that aren't familiar, I apologize, this might not make a huge amount of sense right now, but as I say, I do recommend you going off and having a look. So for those of you who are familiar, right, there are a number of features that you will make use of on-prem that aren't supported in VMC. So I'll just quickly blast through those, and I will ping up on YouTube as well a KB article where these are listed, and maybe some links to some of the videos I mentioned as well. So on-prem, you might be used to using things like View Composer linked clones, whereas in VMC you have to use instant clones instead. There's a feature called content-based read cache, which gives you kind of a performance boost when using using Horizon 7 on-prem. However, that's not required in VMC on AWS. I'd imagine because the storage itself is so performant that you're not using the RAM to provide you a boost there. On-prem, you'd use security servers primarily in your DMZ as a mechanism of controlling and authenticating access, whereas in VMC you'd use the Unified Access Gateway, or the UAG. There's a couple of things that aren't supported, and that's the unmanaged desktops and the Horizon 7 Persona, along with vVols and VCAI. And VCAI is an acronym I can never remember, but it's to do with NFS. Sort of sitting on top of NFS storage, but that's not applicable in VMC because obviously we use vSAN in VMC. We don't use so for those of you that used, for example, vRealize ops management for Horizon, it is supported, but we haven't done much testing on it yet, so I guess that's ongoing, and the KB article will hopefully be updated as and when that's gone through some more testing. We use on-prem, you often use a JMP server, but in VMC you use the JMP on the Horizon Cloud console instead. And there are some other features that are coming but aren't yet available or not yet supported. So the VTPM module is kind of pending availability for VMC. We don't currently support mixed IPv4 and IPv6 on Horizon 7 on VMC, and FIPS isn't currently yet supported either. One of the big requests we're getting at the moment is vGPUs. So there's a lot of work being done around vGPUs, sort of NVIDIA powered stuff on-prem that's not supported yet in VMC on AWS. And obviously we don't have actual physical GPUs in any of our physical hosts either. So anything that requires that kind of performance support is not going to work in VMC. Okay. There is a lot of stuff around interop of current features that are supported. So for example, instant clones, you must use Horizon 7.7, and at volumes you must be running 2.15 or later. So there's a number of things that you may find you have to upgrade from your on-prem version if you're running slightly older. And we do support high availability on the UAG, the Unified Access Gateway, but it requires the UAGs to be on the same segment using multicast. Okay, so same network segment. So VIDM, so for federated identity and the like, we do support that for VMC on AWS. As you'll recall from previous calls, if you have federated identity and VIDM in use at the moment for on-prem Workspace ONE or Horizon 7, currently we have a secondary one that's required for VMC. So you just have to be aware that you may have additional sort of VIDM config or Workspace ONE work to do around federated identity. So it's kind of multiple single federated identity instances. I don't know, without digging into too much detail about AWS managed Microsoft AD, but there's a Horizon agent install that requires local admin rights. And then when you're creating instant clones, the default Active Directory container has permission difference that you need to investigate as well. So you just need to do some lookup around there. And true SSO isn't supported when you're using AWS RDS. Now, apologies, I know that's a bit of a quick run through, and it won't mean much to people that aren't that familiar with Horizon 7. But for those that are, hopefully it'll give you some pointers of things that you may need to look into or change if you're thinking of either migrating workloads or probably more likely redeploying desktops on VMware Cloud on AWS. Now, like I say, lightning run through there. I don't know if there's anything that any of my colleagues online have picked up from their recent work with Horizon 7, that anything you'd think I've missed or something worth calling out, or any of the guys on support that are online as well. If you want to call out, more than happy to have a quick chat about them as well. Okay. If not, I fear it may be a relatively short call. There is another thing actually that's come up of late, and it's been highlighted by a problem we found in HCX. So massively jumping gears, I'm going to talk very briefly about HCX. It's more of a reminder actually that in the HCX release notes, let's just get those up a second, we do call out the versions that we actually support back to. So there was a recent release on the 30th of March, so 7-8 days ago, and if you notice in the release notes now, we call out the releases that we support with the current release. Now, what we're finding is that quite a few customers are not necessarily used to the release cadence of a product like HCX, and it's not necessarily the release cadence of that product itself, but more the outcome of the cloud version updating, and then us requiring you to update your on-prem release as well. So obviously you know that your cloud and your on-prem versions have to be in sync, and if we then only support back 4 versions, you're going to be out of date relatively quickly, and there's no direct jump from like an older outdated version to current version. You may have to either update in series or start again. So actually, as you see here, there's now a support disclaimer in there saying that before you raise a support request, the affected systems must reflect one of the 4 most recent HCX service updates. So you just have to be, it's just a reminder really that you really need to be on top of your updating of HCX if you want to continue using it and if you want it to be supported. And there was a recent problem where one of our large customers had a platform that was unsupported, and it meant that there was an additional sort of outage of that function that it was providing. A lot of extra resource went into it from both our side and the customer side to resolve the issue, because they had to first uplift the versions and they were out of date and yada yada yada. So it's just a reminder really that you kind of need to be on top of your game and staying up to date with your upgrades. Now, anybody else got anything that they want to say about HCX?
Yeah, I'd like to add something here. So what I've seen with one of my customers just recently, for example, in HCX, is that they were on one of the last ones which were supported releases, and they were facing an ESXi licensing error within vCenter. And sometimes you not only have to update the HCX appliance, but also the links.
Yep.
And once you've done that, then the license for this transfer host will be replaced. This is something to really look after. Otherwise, you may end up with an ASXi host with no license, and then you're not able to transfer any data through HCX.
It's a good shout, and I think I know the area that you're referring to there. So people that have deployed HCX, they will see in their environment they've got their primary cluster, and then they'll see this other host that seems to appear, right? And this is kind of a false host. It is something that's deployed as part of HCX, but it obviously has kind of a false license against it, shall we say? And it was this that was expiring, right? And it was because there was a time-bombed license, was it? Or there was something to do with the so a time-bombed license. So sorry, carry on.
So yeah, in the past it was so from what I've heard is that they were trying to, since we have this update cadence every 2 weeks with a new release, that we had this time-bombed based license so that customers were forced to update. But this gave us some issues, and hence we got rid of it. And so once you've updated that one, you get a never expiring license.
Yeah, absolutely. So good point. And again, that obviously was a fair amount of work for that customer to then uplift. Did they have to skip versions, or did they go in series and have to go one upgrade then another?
No, lucky enough, they were on the last supported version, and
cool.
So they could upgrade to not the very current today, but to the back then current version in one go. So they had no intermediate steps to go through.
Brilliant. Well, that's lucky, because that could have been 2 problems in one right there.
Exactly, yeah, that would have been easy.
Cool. So one of my colleagues, we were talking about what other services are around that people can make use of, and we briefly talked about it in the past. And to be fair, there's not a huge amount to say about it apart from it being pretty cool. But it's the cloud marketplace. And I think, cool, Fabio, you are online, brilliant. I think you wanted to just give us a bit of an update or rundown on the marketplace.
Yeah, exactly. I was just talking with several of our colleagues from the PSO, and they're doing a lot of tests, and sometimes they are testing also third-party appliances, and they come back on how we can just deploy faster some appliances and help also our customers to deploy some appliances a little bit faster that are into the marketplace. And I discovered that not a lot of people know that there is the possibility from the cloud marketplace to directly add appliances, so to add to the library all the contents that are actually into the marketplace. So this is, I think that could be useful, because a lot of times otherwise you have to download an OVA template and then re-upload into the SDDC, and it takes time. So there is just a way. If I can just maybe share my screen, I will show where the customer could find that.
Absolutely, yeah. You share your screen and then I'll drag it over so it's picked up.
Okay, that's perfect. Where is the correct one? Sorry, that's live and not able to find. Okay.
How many
So
screens do you have?
actually 3 connected, so that was tricky to find the correct one. Okay, so hope that you see my screen, the right one, and
Yeah.
not the one with stupid stuff.
No, we see the VMC arc, so that's fine.
Okay, that's perfect. So as you can see, into the Cloud Console, there is this wonderful Cloud Marketplace button. So generally, this is not enabled. So first of all, to have the access to the marketplace, you have just to add the role to the user. So if you just go into my user, I was granted, so I granted myself about the cloud marketplace as a marketplace user. So when you just do that, you will be able to reach and to see this,
And
this icon
just
and go
briefly there,
into
Fabio, under IAM for that user, is there just marketplace user as a role, or are there other roles in there as well?
Yes, there is only the marketplace user. There is no other user.
Cool.
And if someone is also administrator or org admin, must be granted explicitly. So actually, I wasn't not granted as a cloud marketplace user, and this is our environment, and I'm an org admin, but I was not able to see. I'm an org owner. I was not able to see that. So must be added manually. Otherwise, you're not able to see that. So
Cool.
this is just one thing that must be done prior to have the access to the marketplace. Then you will be granted to see all the applications that are into our marketplace. So you can just browse for all application and filter for the application that could be installed into VMC. So this could be quite useful. So if we scroll down, we see that there is the VMC tab, and so we will be able to see all the application that could be deployed into VMC. So as you can see, there is a huge amount of application, and there are several that are free. This one or several other that you must purchase a license, so you can bring your own license. And so these are, you can see application from all the third parties. There are also several firewall and security appliances and whatever. So it's quite just easy, and you will find really a lot of useful stuff. And just go for something free. What will happen when you subscribe for an application? This will just look at your environment. So we can just do everything. So we can just choose VMC, we can choose the release of the application. And one thing that is really great is that will show you all your SDDC. So you can choose which SDDC is the right one where you would like to add these appliances. So this will add the appliance to your content libraries. So will not directly deploy the appliance, will just add, will just sync that content with your library. So what will happen is just a pointer to an S3 bucket where all these appliances are stored. So let's go. Take, sorry, but I don't remember any of the password. Okay. So you'll just choose your workload. You can add that application to an existing catalog item, or you can just create a new one. So let's see. Just a summary, you just accept the contract. And what will happen is that if we go into our virtual center, so this one, and if we go, see that there is an item, so the library is now synced. And if we go into our content libraries, you will find that we just have the new item. So one thing that is important is that by default, the system will not start to download the appliances. So if I go on that one, okay, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, so what it doesn't do is it lists it, doesn't it? But it doesn't, which is why the size is 0 bytes until you deploy
It's 0,
from it.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it will start to download it only when you need it. So you can then just download and deploy a new VM using that template, and it will start to download just the OVA, just to avoid to consume data store that it's something good. So it will be only downloaded when you need that. So you can just, sorry, wrong one, deploy a new VM, and you will be able to see your library. And I think that is just something useful because there are a lot of content. So as you can see, there are really is that one, and you can just move forward and deploy your VMs. So it's something that sometimes is useful for our customer, or maybe for some testing. I think that is just a little tip that is useful to know. Let me say.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And I guess that if you say if you actually hosted a content library in an S3 bucket, for example, and then you published it, you could hook multiple SDDCs up to that shared content library, and then you're not burning any of your actual vSphere local storage on a content library shared between many. Yeah,
that is again another useful tips.
Oh, cool. Well, thanks for that. Anybody have any questions relating to that at all? No.
No, but I guess it's really handy, and thanks for sharing that, Fabio. I guess that quite a few people are not really aware of this, and yeah, I sure hope that some people are starting using it and finding some solutions in there which they can leverage.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I was going to ask actually if VMware are actually creating and moderating any of the actual sort of
I
workloads
guess
within
it's
there.
all, yeah, I guess it's all coming through Bitnami, which is part of VMware.
Yeah.
But VMware directly, I'm not too sure, to be honest.
Sorry, when I say that, I mean actually creating and then moderating. So we're sort of VMware created appliances for download, as opposed to you know, third party sort of created. Anyway, cool. It's really good. I think that the number of objects within that will only grow. So I would recommend sort of adding yourself, like Fabio showed you, enabling yourself, and then checking back in there every now and again. But yeah, very useful for lab use or testing if you just want to deploy something rapidly and test network access, that sort of thing. So yeah, pretty cool. Right.
Just a quick question there,
Sure.
Fabio. What is the URL mentioned under the subscription settings? Is it a public URL? I think it should be public. So I was wondering if we should allow internet access for the vCenter.
Yeah, the issue that in the vCenter must be reachable from the external. So I've done several tests into our lab, and actually seems that if you didn't allow the access from the external side, you will not be able just to have the library synced automatically. So you will must do that manually. That is just, let me say, the issue. But there is also the JSON file, the JSON link. So if you are not able to do that automatically, you can just import the library manually, and you will be allowed to access the OVA template. So that is the workaround.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Cool. Right. Thank you again, Fabio, for that. So I don't have anything else that I've sort of brought with me to discuss today. I had a quick look on YouTube earlier on, and there were quite a few new subscribers, but no active questions. So nothing anybody out there was wanting to see demos for or anything at this stage. As normal, if you do have any questions, anything you'd like to see or for us to discuss, do feel free to reach out to us. And we will endeavour to either cover it in the call or demo it, depending how complex. We might need a week or two to go through. I'm doing some work currently with a customer around the content library and S3 buckets and stuff, so if there's anything interesting that comes out of that, I might sort of run a little demo on A, how to set it up, and B, any of these sort of restrictions or gotchas you may find. So I'll probably look to have something spun up in a week or two for the next call. As the calendar note did say as well, we've moved to a every 2 weeks cadence for this call, just because we're pretty busy right now, and I'd rather have the call every couple of weeks than have to cancel on people. So so yeah, look back in 2 weeks from now for the next call, and if there's nothing else from everybody on here, I'll I give you sort of 15 minutes of your day back. Thank you again for watching and dialing in.
Will, I
Yeah.
had something real quick.
Oh,
before
go, yeah, do. Sorry,
we
trying to
probably
sign
need
off. I
to,
didn't give you a normal opportunity, did I?
yeah, we might need to research this. But I was looking at the vSAN storage policy doc,
Yeah.
and it states, and this has not been my experience, but it says there's a VMware Cloud and AWS managed storage policy profile, and it will automatically change your FTT and RAID setting on cluster expansion.
Okay, so this is something that's coming into place soon. It's not rolled out yet, so I don't know if you can share the link with me. That'd be really good.
Yeah, it's in the current documentation, so that had me very confused.
Okay.
Might have been released a bit too early.
I was going to say that would be the biggest the biggest thing ever. Normally we release a product and then release documentation, so that'd be incredible if we've done that.
And it's not in the release notes, so I don't know what to think.
Yeah, interesting. Let's have a quick look at that, shall we?
Yeah, it's about towards the middle. It says VMware Cloud and AWS managed storage policy profiles.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you create a cluster in your SDDC, VMware Cloud on AWS creates a managed storage policy profile that's applied as the default storage policy. This policy is named VMC Workload Storage Policy. Interesting.
And at the bottom it says, below the bullet points, it says adding or removing hosts will trigger a storage policy reconfiguration if it changes the size of the cluster.
Okay, so there's definitely something that's coming, is the auto change of storage policies. However, because there is a potential to negatively impact customers, there's ongoing discussions right now about how this is actually rolled out, whether this gets rolled out and then there's a button to say this will occur, the following action will occur if you make this change, or whether we just notify people that this policy is in there and being used, and yada yada yada. So this kind of, until it's rolled out, we don't really know what the final thing will look like, but it's definitely coming, so that it helps people remain within that sort of storage-based SLA where possible, without them forgetting. So we've had a lot of, this has been driven by quite a number of use cases where people have deployed 3 hosts and then they've scaled out to multiple SDDCs with 16 nodes in each, or more, which they could do originally, but they've still been running with the FTT=1 storage policy, and they've run into issues, or they're consuming more storage than they wanted to based on the policy they were using. So and they were outside of SLA. So we've looked at ways to deploy this automatically. As I say, there's I think some beta users going any day now, working out how to actually deploy it and getting their feedback on it. So the stuff is there and ready to go. I just think we're trying to work out how we deploy it in the least impactful way. Now this does come back around also to the recommendation on not using the default storage and managing and using custom storage policies, and that discussion that we've had in the past as well. Obviously, and then remembering to apply the right storage policies to the right workloads. But yeah, that's an interesting one that already lists this information. I'll do some digging on that one and I'll come back to you. Unless Darren or Donal online, if you have any more information on that. I don't know if you fancy jumping in and saying I have unmuted you so you can talk.
No, I'm surprised as well. I thought it was going to come out later.
Yeah.
So I did see somebody say something about the documentation being updated, even though it's in a future version. I think it might have actually been on purpose, but I don't remember why they said that.
So we're all at a loss, but it's good that the documentation has been updated as of the 13th of last month, actually. So quite a few weeks ago. All right, I'll do some digging and I'll try and find out and I'll report back. Basically, I'll share that internally and I'll put a comment on the YouTube post as well if I find it, or a link to the answer. Cool. Well,
Cool.
thanks for calling that out, Zach. That was really useful. Sorry, Donal, were you just saying something or?
No, just agreeing. That's good.
Cool, wicked. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to ask this time before I hang up on everybody. Anybody else got anything they want to talk about at all?
No, I'm not. Thank you.
Fantastic. Right. Thank you everybody again for joining. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Unless you're watching on YouTube, then I've no idea at what point in your life you're watching this. But thank you for watching anyway. And yeah, we'll come back and I'll hopefully have an answer by then as well on this storage policy business. Thanks a lot. Catch you all soon.
Be safe and be
Thanks.
well, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Be safe.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.